Putting in. It's green, so it means I'm on. Andy, it's green. It's green, so it means it's on.
Should be able to try. Yeah, try this.
I believe it's 10 o'clock. So if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's break the microphone.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which stands
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will call the
We can't see you.
State Board of Elections meeting for June 18th in order to order. And we could have a roll call, please, Amy.
Ms. Ballard Croft? Ms. Ballard Croft? Ms. Ballard? Ms. Croft? Ms. Ballard?
Present.
Ms. Craig?
Amy, we're having a hard time.
We
hearing
have
her.
We need Jeremy. We have a.
There's apparently a very long delay. There's a very long delay.
Okay. Oh, it's right here. There's two of us. Can you hear me now?
Or what folks the alternative.
We have credit to start roll call.
Start the roll call again, is that what you said, Andy?
Yeah.
Amy, would you call the roll again, please?
We'll try this again. Ms. Ballard Croft? We're getting our again. Let me try to turn it off. Our Can you hear us now?
I don't know. It's us. Marty, yeah, every two.
But they had.
Marnie, can you hear us?
I can hear you. There's a little bit of an echo, but I can hear you.
Doing.
Heard you the best.
I think maybe. Jeremy, maybe.
Laura, I can't hear you very well.
That's the first we've heard you, Cassandra. You can't hear us?
Not very well.
I think it might be in Springfield, so they have someone going into the room in Springfield.
Okay.
Recognizing we don't have roll yet, should we have a recess though? Just to get it sorted out, 5 minutes or whatever.
Until we get this sorted, we'll recess for 5 minutes.
Excuse me, Springfield, can you hear me? I'm on the other room. We're just testing this second room just in case.
Thank you.
Do you wanna talk and see, yeah, perfect. Yeah, okay. Marnie, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Can you hear me in Springfield?
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't seem to be, but we've got two connections.
I can hear the second connection very well.
And
Can you hear us in this conference room very well?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes. I think two connections though is probably.
You can move into the next room and everything works.
Okay,
Well,
here we go.
In this corner now. Thank you.
We have a setup.
What was that, Andy?
I'm wondering, can Springfield hear us now very well, or are you guys delayed still?
Can you hear us now in Springfield?
This room is frozen. The other one, nobody's
I
frozen.
think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, then you want to try to do the live stream.
But you're still frozen on the screen, so I think we're gonna.
I'm sorry about this, but we're gonna switch over to this room over here.
Andy, should I turn this off?
Just leave it.
Just go like, yeah, just do it. Yes, just do it.
Chairs, tables? No, just bring
No,
whatever you,
everything's good.
yeah, just bring like that stuff, the pen, whatever you want, and then
You
we'll
called.
just switch over.
you called-
Oh, yeah.
Hey, how are you, Mr. Tenuto? Good to see you, Jim. He's great. He's great. It's good. Had a crazy year. Oh, God, everyone's always up there.
Always something. There you go.
Yeah. He's still full time. Oh, absolutely. He loves here.
Have everything all cheap.
Yeah, that's true.
Usually everything.
From Meyer, I don't know what it is. You said. You know, they heard I was coming, John, and they said, "Oh, clear out, clear out." How are you, sir?
Can you hear me in Springfield, Amy? Are you muted or can you hear us?
Hi, we're here. We were just trying to set up our live stream.
Cassandra, what about you?
I can hear you, Laura.
You want to work on that?
Marnie?
No. you- That's right.
I can
Maybe just
see you.
tap.
I can see you moving, but I can't hear you.
I hear you.
Marnie?
You can hear me?
Oh, hold on a second, hold on a second.
Screenshot. No screenshot and send it to
Go ahead, Marnie, you can speak now.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Amy?
Yes. Do
Wonderful, thank you.
you want me to start the roll again?
Yes, we will. Hang on just a second, Amy.
Okay.
Sarah, are you on? Cassandra?
Can't hear. Oh, but-
You're muted.
Speak up a little, Laura.
Okay, all right, there we go. Amy, please call the
Yes.
roll.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Present?
Ms. Cray,
Present.
Ms. Genovese, Ms. McCrory,
Present.
Mr. Turbin, Mr. Brett,
Present.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Present.
Chair Watson.
Present.
Chair Watson, I assume you have the proxies for member Turbin and member Javasi?
Yes, I do, but you're gonna have to speak up because I'm not hearing you real well.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, it is.
All right. We are going to do the approval of the minutes and we have a couple of corrections to the minutes. I will call on member Craig.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the May 21st meeting with 2 corrections. On page 2, item 3, it is not stated who made the motion. So if we could add that, please, Amy. And on page 3, under item 11, the second line, I don't think you meant to say defenses fail and but. I think we just need to correct and edit that. So with those 2 changes, I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second, by member McCrory, Amy, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Abstain.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese, Ms.
Yes.
Genovese, Ms.
Yes.
McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Motion passed. All right, now, for those in the room, we are going to take report of the general counsel and move to complaint following the public hearing for 4A7. Harden versus people who play by the rules act. So we're gonna move to that and then we'll go back and follow our agenda. So, Marnie, report of the
Yes,
general counsel.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and I apologize to everyone that I have to be remote today. I have a Tuesday afternoon wedding to go to, so here I am. But should you have trouble hearing me at any point, Jordan is prepared to take over. So I will proceed if that's okay. This is a longer recommendation, so I appreciate everyone bearing with me. We also have representations for the parties here. I see for Dan Croft and people who play by the rules pack, we have counsel. Is there counsel present in Chicago for other parties?
Is there counsel
Yes.
here?
David Fox, for complaining Ben Hardy.
David Fox.
And Madam Vice Chair, Jeffrey Meyer on behalf of respondents, Gary Bailey and Billy Brown.
Did you hear that? Jeffrey Meyer on behalf of Bailey and
Bailey Brown.
Bailey for Illinois. Anyone else present? All right, Marnie, would you proceed?
I do believe we have counsel on Zoom
That's correct. This is Joseph Vanderhulst on behalf of Dan Proft and people who play by the rules pack. If you guys can hear me, okay.
We can hear you, Joseph. Thank you.
Awesome.
Can you hear Marnie?
I can.
All right, Marnie, are you ready?
Wonderful, thank you. I appreciate everybody being here and bearing with me on this rather long recommendation. But after I speak, the parties will have an opportunity to comment on the recommendation of the hearing officer and the general counsel and make any arguments to the board before the board votes on the matter. So I'd like to make a part of the record today the proposed findings of the general counsel, which have been circulated to all parties in this matter and to all members of the board to supplement this oral report. Copies are also available at the front desks in both meeting rooms. For a brief procedural history of this matter, on February 24th, 2023, this matter was ordered to public hearing for the question of whether respondents Bailey for Illinois and Darren Bailey violated section 9-8.5 and section 9-10 of the election code, and whether respondents Dan Proft and people who played by the rules pack violated section 9-8.6 of the election code as a result of a coordinated contribution that was allegedly incorrectly reported as an independent expenditure. After extensive discovery conducted under the limitations of the board's order, the public hearing in this matter took place on April 29th, 2024. After the parties submitted post-hearing briefs, the hearing officer issued his recommendation on May 31st, 2024. Our hearing officer was Mr. James Tenuto, and I believe Mr. Tenuto is present in Chicago. Is that well?
Yes.
Wonderful. And that's JAMES space TENUTO. So Mr. Tenuto is available for questions as well. So you can find copies of the post-hearing briefs of the parties in the additional materials packet, as well as the hearing officer's full recommendation on pages 44 to 65 of the board packet. So in brief, I recommend adopting the hearing officer's recommended findings of fact in part and denying them in part. I recommend adopting the hearing officer's recommended conclusions of law in part and denying them in part, and recommend supplementing both the findings of fact and conclusions of law, as I will explain in the next few minutes. As to the finding of facts, the recommendation is to adopt the hearing officer's finding of facts 1 through 7, 9 through 17, and 19 to 20. I do recommend deleting findings of fact 8 and 19 of the hearing officer. I further recommend supplementing the findings as follows, and I think that reading this full list will serve to remind everybody of the full facts of the case. So thanks for bearing with me through this not short list. So respondent Bailey for Illinois is a candidate political committee created to support respondent Darren Bailey, who ran for governor in 2022. Respondent People Who Play by the Rules PAC is an independent expenditure committee, and respondent Dan Proft is its founder. Respondent Bailey appeared as a guest on respondent Proft's radio show multiple times prior to both the 2022 general primary and general elections, as did other candidates running for office in 2022. Respondent Bailey won the Republican primary on June 28th, 2022. On June 29th, 2022, the very next day, respondents Proft and Bailey, as well as respondent Bailey's campaign manager, Jose Durbin, held a meeting at a country club. And at that June 29th meeting, respondent Proft offered to take over Bailey's campaign. Respondent Proft offered a potential contribution of $20 million from contributor Richard Uihlein, that's UIHLEIN, to be given directly to respondents Bailey and Bailey for Illinois. However, respondent Proft's offers were made on the condition that respondent Bailey fire his campaign staff and give respondent Proft control of his campaign. Respondent Bailey rejected Respondent Prof's offer to run Bailey's campaign. Mr. Uline later gave tens of millions of dollars to respondent People Who Play by the Rules PAC rather than respondents Bailey and Bailey for Illinois. Now, respondents and campaign manager Durbin's testimony do not evidence any discussion among them specifically concerning the PAC's advertisements that respondent People Who Play by the Rules PAC later funded and distributed. Now, following the June 29th meeting, respondents Proft and Bailey did not talk again privately in advance of the November election, according to the testimony. Respondent People Who Play by the Rules PAC also used B-rolls of video footage from respondent Bailey's campaign after June 29th, 2022 for advertisements supporting the Bailey campaign and many opposing Bailey's opponent's campaign in connection with the November 2022 general election. These B-rolls were available on the internet for free usage by the public at large. Now, as to the standard of review in judging whether these were coordinated contributions versus independent expenditures, I recommend rejecting the quid pro quo standard that was proposed by the hearing officer here. The quid pro quo standard is at least partially borrowed from federal standards, but the board has not adopted any particular standard through its rulemaking for determining whether an expenditure is independent versus coordinated. So I recommend instead here that any consideration of federal law be considered as persuasive authority at most, unless of course it is binding directly in Illinois, such as something from the United States Supreme Court. I do note though that all campaign disclosure law is premised in and justified by the goal of preventing quid pro quo of corruption or its appearance. So certainly that's always a factor in every campaign finance law and whether it is in fact valid. But here we are looking at more specific statutes, and I want to make sure that the board is focusing on the plain language of those statutes, which are 9-8.5 and 9-8.6. We also have a claim under 9-10, which I'll discuss towards the end of this recommendation. So under, as to conclusions of law, under either the quid pro quo standard or the statutory standards, I recommend finding that complainants have not met their burden to prove coordination among the respondents, such that the contributions at issue here should be classified as coordinated rather than independent expenditures. Doing so requires accepting the recommended conclusions of law in part and rejecting them in part from the hearing officer. So specifically, on page 63 of the recommendation, in the conclusion of law section, I recommend adopting the hearing officer's legal conclusion that the evidence does not support a violation of section 9-8.6. However, I recommend against concluding the evidence does not support a violation of section 9-1.15, as that section was not pleaded in the complaint or ordered to public hearing by this board. As to recommendation 1 on page 63, I recommend rejecting it. I don't see a reason to dismiss the complaints without consideration of the evidence, if that is in fact what the hearing officer is asking for, because I'm not certain based on the language. But here the board determined the case was filed on justifiable grounds and ordered it to a public hearing, and the matter should be decided on the evidence presented at the hearing in this matter, in my opinion. As to recommendation 2, I agree with it in part and disagree in part, as well as recommend supplementing it as follows. I agree with the hearing officer's conclusion that the board should find the evidence presented at the public hearing did not establish that coordination took place among the respondents. I agree that violations of section 9-8.6 have not been proven, but I recommend clarifying that the evidence does not support a violation of section 9-8.6 by respondents Dan Proft and People Who Play by the Rules PAC. allegations under section 9-8.6 was ordered to public hearing. Oh, excuse me, no allegation under 9-8.6 was ordered to public hearing against respondents Bailey for Illinois or Darren Bailey. I also recommend concluding against reaching a conclusion on section 9-1.15, as that section was not pleaded in the complaint or ordered to public hearing. And recommendation 3, I agree with its suggestion that it would be helpful if rules were promulgated or the statute amended to clarify which activities are acceptable or prohibited in regards to independent expenditures. However, any findings or decisions on this issue are not necessary to the decision of this case or to the conclusion of this case. I think it's just some nice food for thought offered by the hearing officer. And I certainly don't disagree with him that further clarification on standards for what constitutes an independent expenditure would be helpful to everyone in the campaign finance community. And then finally, I recommend supplementing the hearing officer opinion as follows. The complainant produced insufficient evidence to prove that respondents Bailey for Illinois and Darren Bailey violated section 9-10C of the election code, as complainant has not shown by a preponderance of the evidence a failure to disclose a contribution of $1,000 or more in a timely fashion. The complainant produced insufficient evidence to prove that respondents Bailey for Illinois and Darren Bailey violated section 9-8.5, as complainant has not shown by a preponderance of the evidence that they accepted contributions from an independent expenditure committee, here respondent People Who Play by the Rules PAC, in violation of that section. Respondent Bailey's public appearances on Respondent Prof's radio show do not evidence unlawful coordination among the respondents. In there, I cite a case that is cited to by the parties in their closing briefs. It's Center for Individual Freedom versus Madigan, 697 F3rd 464. That's a 7th Circuit opinion from 2012, but it is made under Illinois law. And finally, respondent People Who Play by the Rules PAC usage of publicly posted B-rolls of video footage does not evidence unlawful coordination among respondents, citing to the same case. So I realize, looking at my opinion, it could look like I am deviating a lot from the hearing officer opinion. I'm really not. I think that Jim and I are very closely on the same page as to what we think the result of this case is, and the result of this case is that there's not enough evidence to move forward. I think the statutory standard at issue is really our only main point of disagreement. And I think, again, under both standards, that there just hasn't been sufficient proof here to find a violation. So that is my recommendation. I don't know if the vice chair is ready to turn it over to council.
Thank you. Discussion. I think we should hear. Marnie, who should I call first?
I would call the complainant first. Pardon.
Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Good morning again. I'm David Fox for the complainant, Ben Pardon. I want to start by thanking the board, the general counsel.
Madam Vice Chair, I can't hear him at all.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to take him up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
A little louder would be helpful.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, that's better.
Great. Again, I'm David Fox for complainant Ben Pardon. I want to start by thanking the board, the general counsel, and the hearing officer for their careful attention to this matter. The evidence at the public hearing showed that respondents engaged in unlawful coordination when Mr. Bailey and Mr. Prof openly discussed Mr. Bailey's preferred messaging on Mr. Prof's radio show. And when Mr. Bailey, his campaign manager, and Mr. Prof met in secret in a Chicago area country club to discuss the PAC's spending plans for the general election on the first day of that election. I want to start with the radio show. Those two events raise slightly different issues under the legal standard. On the radio show, on the morning of June 29th, the first day of the general election, Mr. Bailey appeared on Mr. Prof's radio show. He knew that Mr. Prof had been running an independent expenditure PAC in support of him. And he spoke directly one-on-one with Mr. Prof on this radio show and told Mr. Croft what messaging would help his campaign. And Mr. Croft then went on to have his committee run ads on exactly that subject. All of those facts, I take it, are undisputed. The question is, how do they fit with the legal standard? And section 9(8.6)(a) flatly prohibits independent expenditure committees from making expenditures in connection, consultation, or concert with or at the request or suggestion of the candidate. And the committee did just that when it ran ads on the subject that Mr. Bailey suggested to Mr. Croft and requested from Mr. The hearing officer and the general counsel have no adequate explanation for how that conduct could be lawful. The hearing officer's theory, as I understand it, is that the request was unnecessary. That the crime is out of control message was obvious, so there was no need for Mr. Bailey to ask Mr. Croft to run ads on it. But necessary or not, obvious or not, for good reason, there is no exception in the statute for necessary or obvious requests. Political messaging will often seem obvious, especially after the fact, and evaluating whether a particular message was obvious will present the board with impossible line drawing. Far better and far more consistent with statutory language to simply say that independent committees and candidates may not discuss messaging parameters. The general counsel urges, as I understand it, a different theory, which is that only non-public communications can violate 9(8.6)(a). And for that, the general counsel relies on the Seventh Circuit's decision in Madigan. But Madigan's discussion of non-public and reading of a non-public element into the statute was limited to one word in the statute, which was knowledge. The Seventh Circuit was addressing a constitutional concern that public knowledge could not lead to a finding of coordination, because what if the candidate found out about the fact that an ad was being run because it was publicly reported as being run? Is that then coordination? That is specific to the knowledge issue. And this is not in a situation where we're talking about knowledge. We're talking about a consultation, a request, and a suggestion. There's nothing in 8.6(a) that says a non-public consultation, a non-public request, or a non-public suggestion. And again, that's for good reason. If the board says otherwise, then every independent committee in the state will soon have a radio show or a podcast. And 8.6(a) is going to be a bit later. That brings me to the afternoon of June 29th. When Mr. Bailey, Mr. Croft, and Mr. Bailey's campaign manager met in person in the back room of the country club. At that meeting, the campaign and the committee traded views on each other's ads. And then Mr. Croft told Mr. Bailey that he had $20 million from Richard Uihlein to spend on the contest. And Mr. Bailey could choose, was framed very clearly by Mr. Croft as a choice. Mr. Bailey could choose if that money went to his campaign or if Mr. Croft spent it through the PAC. Either way, Mr. Croft was going to spend it. And Mr. Croft's testimony again very clear. Mr. Bailey chose. He chose the PAC. And the PAC then did exactly what Mr. Croft said the PAC was going to do. So the resulting expenditures were plainly made in connection, consultation, or concert with Mr. Bailey's campaign, as 8.6(a) prohibits. Mr. Croft did exactly what he told Mr. Bailey he was going to do, just a few days after he told Mr. Bailey he was going to do. As I understand the hearing officer's reasoning, he was concerned that Mr. Uihlein wasn't bound by any agreement. So that Mr. Bailey didn't control, the hearing officer used the word control, he didn't control whether or where the contribution was made or how it was spent. But control is not the statutory test. The statute intentionally uses much broader language than control. Request, suggestion. Those are not words that involve legally binding agreements. There's no requirement for a legally binding agreement. And so the fact that this wasn't control makes no difference under the statute. The fact that they discussed it, they coordinated over it, and then Mr. Croft did exactly what he told Mr. Bailey he would do and what Mr. Bailey had chosen is enough to satisfy the statutory standard. The general counsel rightly rejects a quid pro quo standard. So I understand the general counsel to be rejecting this control requirement from the hearing officer's analysis. But that leaves it a little bit unclear to me what the general counsel's basis is for finding that this discussion did not violate the statute. And my guess, based on the general counsel's factual findings, is that the conclusion is based on the fact that this discussion did not discuss specific advertisements. And that's true. The facts are clear. They did not discuss specific advertisements. But nothing in 598.6 requires a discussion of specific expenditures. And again, that is for good reason. If it was perfectly fine for Mr. Croft and Mr. Bailey to sit down and talk about their general strategy and spending on the race that was coming up, then that will open an enormous loophole in the coordination regime. Parties, nothing in that conclusion turns on the fact that this was a single meeting, that it was only 30 minutes, that it happened on the first day of the general election. Under an analysis that says as long as they don't discuss specific ads, it's fine. They could meet every week for an hour and talk about how they're gonna plan on spending their money as long as they don't talk about a particular ad. And that's exactly what will happen if the board blesses this kind of activity. Fundamentally, what the board should bear in mind is that the facts of this case are what happened in a scenario where Mr. Croft and Mr. Bailey knew they shouldn't be talking to each other. The evidence before the hearing officer showed that they had a policy that Mr. Bailey would not even go to Mr. Croft's events or events where Mr. Croft was present because they were concerned about the appearance of coordination. If the board says that this type of activity is perfectly fine, it is going to see far worse in the near future, and the standards that have been proposed by the hearing officer and the general counsel will do nothing to stop it. The board therefore faces a stark choice in this matter. The facts of this matter are quite clear, and they are quite egregious. If the board says that this is perfectly fine, it is going to open an enormous loophole in the coordination standard. And for that reason, we ask the board find that Mr. Croft and the PAC violated the law by making coordinated contributions in the forms of coordinated expenditures, and that Bailey for Illinois violated the law by accepting and filling for a protest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Do you have choice which one wants to go first?
I'll defer to Mr. Vanderbilt if you'd like.
Okay, Joseph, I apologize, but that's the only name I have on the screen, so.
Yeah, it's Vanderhulst. Sorry, it asked for,
would
it
you
wasn't
spell
clear
that?
what was going to be demonstrated. And of course, Mr. Meyer volunteered that I went first since I'm not there. So that's my punishment.
Would you spell, state your name and spell it?
Yeah, it's Joseph Vanderhulst. That's Vanderhulst for Dan Proft and the PAC, people who play by the rules. I just want to comment on basically on the radio show and the meeting, because this is all, everything just boils down to, is this discussion they had on the radio show and the discussion they had in the meeting sufficient to demonstrate coordination? And I also wanted to thank Mr. Tenuto and the general counsel for their recommendations. I don't really have anything to add other than I just want to respond basically to Mr. Fox. So again, on the radio show, the main point I want to make is that the distinction between private and public discussions is really important, because if we take complainant's position to its logical conclusion, everyone listening to the radio show, and it's a long-standing radio show, like going back decades, and he has candidates on constantly all the time in all kinds of races. Anyone listening to a candidate say what they want their messaging to be, that means that they could not go out and do an independent expenditure, because they heard and they received instruction on what the messaging should be. I think that's frankly, it's kind of an absurd position, given that candidates are constantly putting out in the public what they think their positions are and what they're running on. That doesn't mean that anyone who hears them, whether it's Mr. Proft who's hosting the show or it's the audience who's listening to the show, then can't run any ads on those subjects. And I think Mr. Tenuto makes a really good point that, well, two things on that. That first of all, it wasn't a secret what the messaging was that Mr. Bailey was running on, and secondly, this actually came out in the hearing. Mr. Proft ran ads on the subject of crime in the primary that didn't mention Mr. Bailey and had nothing to do with Mr. Bailey. They were actually against one of the other primary candidates. So before the supposed messaging on the radio show and before the meeting, he was already running ads on that subject. So the later ads were just a continuation. Same thing with the meeting itself. As hard as it is to prove a negative, which is kind of the position that the respondents were in, I mean, the meeting in a sense proves a negative. It proves a lack of coordination rather than the presence of coordination. While it's, again, the statute and the regulations aren't super detailed like federal regulations are in terms of, you know, discussion of this equals coordination and whatnot. At the very least, there needs to, and it's always been our position and the campaign's position, that there at least needs to be some kind of discussion of actual expenditures. And it doesn't have to be those specific, even if it's not those specific ads. Here, there was no discussion of actual expenditures at all. I think if you look at the actual evidence in the actual hearing, and the actual testimony, there was no discussion at all of actual spending or actual campaign strategy or anything like that. It was just, you know, Mr. Prof saying, we don't think you're running the campaign very well. We would like to take over. And the campaign saying, you know, we don't like your ads and we don't think you know, we reject that offer. Like, that was it. So that's about, in our opinion, all that can be said about the meeting. I will say there was one factual thing in the recommendation. The findings and the recommendation said that all of the ads featured B-roll, and I just wanted to clarify that there were 4 ads and only one of them featured B-roll. The other 3 were just were all original content. And as far as making a distinction on the findings of facts. And the last thing I'll say is that in terms of federal law, I think it would actually be instructive. Again, this would just be persuasive, but under none of the federal regulations of the different categories and different kinds of activity that would constitute coordination would these facts fit in. There's an express exception for public communications. There's, you know, pretty well defined advisory opinions on the use of B-roll. It's pretty, it would, put it this way, I don't think that the complaint would even be filed if federal regulations were what is controlling. And thank you very much. Thank you to the board, and we look forward to, you know, bringing this to a conclusion and finding out what your determination is. Thank you.
Anything to add?
I'll be very brief, I promise.
All right. Name, spell.
Sure. Jeffrey A. Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R. And on behalf of Darren Bailey Frella. Would you like me to use the microphone?
Yes, I would.
Just checking to make sure that everyone can hear my comments. That's confirmation. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And again, thank you to the board, to Hearing Officer Tenuto, and to the General Counsel for their work on this matter. Suffice it to say, I concur with Mr. Vanderholt's comments and largely concur with the recommendation of the General Counsel in its modifications to the Hearing Officer's recommendation in this case. There are a couple of things that I do believe warrant some maybe further refinement. One is there's a finding concerning the use of B-roll footage, and the evidence at the hearing was the B-roll footage actually appeared in one of the PAC advertisements, not all the PAC advertisements that were identified in evidence in this case. And that one video where the B-roll footage appeared,
then another exhibit introduced at the hearing was a shortened version of that video. So there were 5 videos that were admitted into evidence as the examples of the purported electioneering communication in this case, only one of which, or 1.5, I guess, contained any B-roll footage. And to the extent it matters, that'd be the only clarification of the findings of fact in the reports that I think the board should make. We're here, I think, largely because of the conflict that you'll note between the hearing officer and the general counsel, and that is, what is the standard? It's not perfectly clear what the standard is under Illinois law. This board has never, to my knowledge, I think anyone's knowledge, enunciated specifically what the standard for coordination or prohibited coordination would be. And that's how we got here. The fact that the hearing officer and the general counsel have a somewhat difference of opinion about it is very telling. And that's problematic for candidates and for committees. We're here at the end of an adjudication for allegedly violating a rule that no one has been able so far to articulate. And that to me seems somewhat backwards. Typically, you'll have an adjudication for violating a clearly enunciated rule and not an adjudication to define what the rule is. The suggestion from the hearing officer, I think, is salient, that it may behoove the board to consider rulemaking to clarify in advance what is or is not specifically conduct that is permitted or prohibited under Illinois law. But regardless of whatever standards you apply, I agree that regardless of which standard, whether you adopt the hearing officer standard or the general counsel standard, there is insufficient evidence in this case to establish that unlawful coordination took place. Here's one. In either circumstance, you have to first identify what was the expenditure. What is the electioneering communication? What are we talking about? All the hyperbole aside about backroom meetings or about whether Mr. Uline offered contributions or maybe would offer contributions, none of that really has anything to do with what's really at issue in this case. That is 5 very specific electioneering communications. Talking about whether or not there was coordination on expenditures. First, start by defining what are the expenditures. There were 5 videos. 3 of those videos were related to crime generally in Illinois, and one was a somewhat character piece, advocating or suggesting that Darren Bailey's man was a character. Okay, those are 5 very specific electioneering communications, and there is not one scintilla of evidence in the record that there was ever any communication, suggestion, or otherwise concerning those 5 expenditures. None whatsoever. Mr. Fox hasn't identified today or argued today that there ever was. In fact, what the complainant relies on in this case is 2 very general, very brief and general contacts between the 2 parties. One is a 30-minute meeting at a country club where, if anything, the evidence seems to indicate that my clients had absolutely no interest whatsoever in working with Mr. Proft, and where Mr. Proft never had any interest in working with Mr. Bailey. If anything, that's what the evidence shows. They clearly didn't want to work with each other. Mr. Bailey did not want Mr. Proft running his campaign. Mr. Proft wasn't interested in working with him directly if he could. If anything, that's what the evidence shows. That's the antithesis of coordination, not evidence of it. And it certainly had nothing to do with the 5 communications or the electioneering communications, the expenditures, if you will, that are at issue in this case. The general conversation on a radio program. Once again, there is no evidence, nor really any argument that was specific to the electioneering communications that were identified in this case. None whatsoever. It's a conversation generally about what's happening in the campaign. No different than any other public appearance on any media venue or media platform that Mr. Bailey had during the campaign whatsoever. And to the extent that there were advertisements run subsequent to that that had anything to do with public safety in Chicago, as Mr. Vanderholz, I think, saliently points out, those were messages that were advertised or that were in the electioneering communications by the PAC during the entirety of the campaign, both during the primary and during the general prior thereto. And there's nothing unique about that. There certainly were not unique messages in the campaign during that election cycle about crime in the state of Illinois or crime in Chicago in particular. But for all of those reasons, and the reasons that are articulated in both Mr. Tenuto's recommendation report and the hearing officer's recommendation report, no matter which standards you apply, There's no evidence of any coordination whatsoever on the electioneering communications that are at issue in this case. For those reasons, we urge the adoption of the recommendation of the hearing officers modified by the general counsel. My only final comment would be, I don't know that it's essential to the this board's findings. In this case, there were, if you bear with me for just one moment. The additional findings that the general counsel urges be made supporting the board's decision. This is G, H, and J concerning the alleged contribution or conditional contribution from Mr. Uline. Again, those are, if anything, is evidence concerning purported or possible contributions and nothing to do with electioneering communications. I don't think this board needs to make any findings regarding alleged or conditional or possible contributions from Mr. Uline in any regard relating to whether or not there was coordination on electioneering communications and expenditure. It has nothing to do with the expenditures, but I think it has to do with contribution. I don't think those findings, in fact, are necessary for this board to reach its decision, but again, we would concur largely with both the recommendation and report of the hearing officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, is there discussion? Is there more comments? Do we have any discussion? Marnie, do you have anything further?
Yes, so on proposed finding of fact M, I have no problem with qualifying that to say, you know, only some of the advertisements by people who play by the rules pact use this B-roll footage. I had not intended to suggest that it was used in all of the advertisements. It wasn't. So to the extent we'd like to qualify that, that's perfectly fine with me. As to J, that was just brought up, the reason I included Mr. Uline's subsequent contributions to people who play by the rules pack is because I saw it as corroborating evidence supporting the party's story about what happened at the June meeting, that there was an offer for money and that offer was rejected. Do I think that fact is absolutely crucial to a determination here? No, I don't. I just thought it was a way of showing that the party's statements were in fact honest, that there was an offer to give this money along with control of the campaign, and that offer was rejected.
Any discussion? Further discussion? Do I have a motion?
Madam Vice Chair, I'd like to make a motion, please. I would like to make a motion to adopt the recommendation of the general counsel to adopt the hearing officer's recommended findings of fact in part, reject the hearing officer's recommendation findings of fact in part, and as supplemented by the general counsel. In addition, I would like to move to adopt the recommendation of the general counsel to adopt the hearing officer's recommendation conclusions of law in part, and reject the hearing officer's recommended conclusions of law in part, and is supplemented by the general counsel.
Do I have a second?
Second.
May I ask for one
Question.
clarification on the motion?
Right.
Yes, just a second, Cassandra, let Marnie.
Is the motion including a modification of fact M and a deletion of fact J?
Exactly.
I would add that to the motion, please. Cassandra, anything further?
No, I had exactly what Marnie said.
Perfect, thank you. Roll call, Amy?
Ms. Ballard Croft,
No.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McQuarrie,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes,
Chair Watson,
Yes.
motion passes.
motion passed. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And Madam Vice Chair, if I might,
Yes,
I don't know if we want to call the cases for SOEB at this time in order to start the meetings with the hearing officers. I defer to Jordan on that, but if Jordan wants to give a thumbs up or thumbs down, that would be helpful.
That would be ideal.
all right. She gave a thumbs up, Marty.
We could recess into the state officer's report.
All right, we will recess. We will take our agenda. Item 2, recess the State Board of Elections and convene as the State Officers Electoral Board. Roll call.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call, Amy.
Ms. Bellercroft,
Present.
Ms. Craig,
Present.
Mr. Nabezi,
Yes. Present.
Ms.
No, I'm sorry.
I got you.
Ms. McCory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin, Mr. Brett,
Present.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Present.
Chair Watson.
Present.
All right. We're as our electoral board. All right. And we'll do, Hudson versus Keevan. 24 SOEBG E100.
Yes, here.
Jordan?
Okay, that's okay. Good morning. As acknowledged by the vice chair, the state office of electoral board is being convened under sections 10-8-8 through 10-10 of the election code for the purposes of hearing and passing upon objection petition filed to the nomination waivers resolution to appoint established party candidates to fill vacancies in nomination for the November 5th.
Madam Vice Chair, I cannot hear.
All right, okay, be into it.
How's this?
Oh, good. We'll hear a lot louder. They need to.
Immediately following the call of your case, if you were in Chicago, which my understanding all parties are in Chicago, please immediately proceed to the headway level of the SBE offices, where you'll meet with SBE staff who will facilitate your initial case management conferences with the hearing officers. Just a couple things before we get started with the call of cases. No cases will be decided today. No evidence or arguments will be heard today, either by the board or your hearing officers. These are expedited proceedings that move very quickly, and the deadlines for the next steps in this process do come very quickly. So please review the rules of procedure just as soon as you're able. So with that, as the vice chair stated, the first case is Hudson versus Keevan, 24 SOEBGE 100. We've received appearances from Kevin Morphew for the objector and Mr. John Fogarty for the candidate. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
The second case is Hanson v. Puckett, 24 SOEBGE 500. Again, appearances from Mr. Morphew for the objector and Mr. Fogarty for the candidate.
That's correct. Yes.
Third case is Ishmael versus Alexander, 24 SOEBGE 501. Appearances from Mr. Morphew for the objector and Mr. Fogarty for the candidate.
Correct.
Very good. The fourth one is Rico v. Szymankowski, 24 SOEBGE 502. Appearances from Mr. Morphew for the objector and Mr. Fogarty for the candidate.
Correct. Yes.
And lastly, Basinger versus Bear, 24 SOEBGE 503. Appearances from Mr. Morphew for the objector and Mr. Fogarty for the candidate.
Correct.
All right, very good. Are there any parties present in Springfield who were not acknowledged?
None here.
Okay, very good. Any parties in Chicago on these matters that were not acknowledged? All righty, very good. Thank you very much. If we could proceed to the headway level to meet with the hearing officers.
Thank
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Jordan. Now we need to approve the rules of procedure for the state officers electoral board, that's page 3 through 22. Do we have any discussion? Not, can I have a motion?
Motion to approve the rules of procedure.
Second? Second from Catherine. Amy, roll call.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes,
Chair Watson.
Present.
Motion passes.
all right. We've already authorized our hearing officers.
No, there's
Yeah,
a motion,
okay.
we need to, if you would please, as detailed in the memo on page 23 of your SOEB packet. General counsel is requesting authorization to appoint Justice Matthias Delort and Ms. Barbara Goodman to serve as hearing officers in the cases as detailed within that memo.
All right,
And then additionally, with the authority, should the parties request with good cause shown or an administrative need arise to reassign a hearing officer.
I have a motion to that effect.
Motion. Second.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Amy, roll call, please.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes,
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
is there other business to come before the board, electoral board? Yeah. Public comments? Springfield, Amy, anyone down there?
I've none here.
All right, then do I have a motion to recess state officers electoral board until July 9th, 2024 at 10 a.m.
I move. Second.
Amy, roll call.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes,
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
all right, we are recessed. Now, George, are you? We'll continue with 4A.
Yes, you need to,
Oh.
you have, next, you need to reconvene as the state board of elections.
We will reconvene as the State Board of Elections. Do I have a motion to that effect?
I move to reconvene as the state board of elections.
And a second.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes,
Genovese, Ms. Genovese,
Sandra?
Cassandra?
No.
This is for purposes of attendance.
Yes. Correct. Oh, she'd be a no. Amen. Yeah,
Okay. Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin, Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Present.
Chair Watson.
Present.
All right. Now, report of the general counsel with campaign disclosure, appeals of campaign disclosure fines. Hearing officers' recommendations granted. And do we have anyone here with those cases? We take them all in one,
We may.
right?
So here, if,
Jordan?
here we have 3 cases as indicated on the agenda, where the hearing officer's recommendation and the general counsel concurs in the hearing officer's recommendation to grant the appeals.
I have a motion.
So moved.
Second. Amy, roll call please.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Did you say Turvin?
I did, Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson,
Yes.
motion passes.
All right, appeals of campaign disclosure fines. Hearing officer recommendation denied. This would be, do I need to read them? Should I read them? Okay, it would be 4A4, 4A5, and 4A6. Do we have anyone here?
None in
No.
Springfield.
Then in Springfield? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
To accept the recommendations of the hearing officers for 4A4.
If I, sorry, Madam Chair,
Yes.
Vice Chair, if I may, I would just like to clarify that the recommendation of the general counsel is to adopt the recommendation of the hearing officer, finding that the appeal should be denied for lack of a statutory basis there.
Thank you. Do I have a motion? So, and a second.
Second.
Amy, roll call?
Ms. Ballarcroft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson,
Yes.
motion passes.
Right. Anything in that regard, Jordan, are we okay?
In regards to the appeals, you are correct. So our next item is agenda item number 4A8.
So there, the assessments of the board, they're in your packet from page 93 and 94. We will need a motion on that. Do I have a motion to accept the assessments?
Second.
Second, Amy, roll call?
Ms. Ballarcroft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you, Amy. On 4A9, the unpaid fines, they're informational. 95 and to 133 in your packet. I think I'll put on the record that I've asked to have a letter sent to those on this list. Pay their fines.
You put on record to have what, Madam Vice Chair?
A letter sent asking them to pay their fines.
Ah.
Because they've been around some have been around for a long time. And they're just ignoring this. Well, appreciate that. Yes.
I would just like to thank Tom Newman. Tom, we asked you this at the last meeting. You got this to us very rapidly. I greatly appreciate it. And the citizens of Illinois are due over $1 million on this list. And so, yes, I think we need to write a letter at the very least saying taxpayers would like their money.
All right, in 4A10, again, it's informational only, but it's payments, people who have paid their assessments. Expect that. Anything else in that regard? If not, I will call on Bernadette, our executive director, for her report.
Okay, good morning, everybody. The first item on my report is, this is an informational item related to voting systems. It's a Hart Verity 2.7 IL engineering change order. The
A little
state.
louder, please, Bernadette.
Louder? Okay. The Illinois State Board of Elections received a request for review of 2 de minimis changes to the Hart Verity 2.7 IL voting system. This system had previously received a 2-year interim approval on November 21st, 2023, after a successful SBE test campaign. The changes were reviewed by SB staff. And as required under section 24A-16 and in accordance with of the Illinois Election Code and in accordance with our administrative rules, the board considers the nature of these changes to be de minimis. Therefore, there's no further testing that's required. Just wanted to note that this is an informational item. There's no board action on it, being that it is not a modification to the system itself. If there's any questions related to it, we're happy to take it. Otherwise, this is purely informational.
Are there any questions? All right, continue, Bernadette.
Okay, great. For the next item, I am actually going to pass it to our Chief Fiscal Officer, Elena Gutsalenko. She's joining via Zoom, and she is going to give a rundown of the FY25 budget summary that was recently passed in the General Assembly. Thanks, Elena.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Elena Gutsalenko. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer for the State Board of Elections. I joined the State Board of Elections in February of this year, and I'm here to give you a brief overview of our budget. Please let me go through the slides, and if you have any questions, I will answer them after the presentation. So first, what I wanted to show you, I want to share my screen, and so I can show you some slides. The slides will be available for your use after the meeting if you would like to take a look at them. So first, the general information about the budget. So general revenue fund was presented to the board of the amount $30,334,900. That was the amount that was requested from General Assembly, and that is the amount that was received. There was a little glitch where our budget was cut short in the first iteration of the appropriation bill, but we were lucky to get all the money that we needed back into our budget. So what we have asked, we have received. HAVA fund was presented to the board at $14,095,700. That was the amount that was requested, and that was the amount that we received for fiscal year 25. And personal property tax replacement fund that funds these stipends for the election judges, clerks, and recorders. The amount that was presented to the board was $4,954,000, and it was requested and received. Next, I wanted to show you a little historical information about how our budget developed. So I prepared some slides for you, and the first slide shows you the history from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 25. This is the overall budget for the State Board of Elections. As you can see, our total budget have been increasing exponentially. In 22, we had $42 million, and in 25, we requested and received $49 million appropriation. The next slide is I broke down our budget by fund. We have three major funds: the General Revenue Fund that funds our operations, and this is the blue column that you see. Again, this is historical. So for 22, we got $19 million, and for 25, we received $30 million. And if you see the GRF appropriation already also has increased over time. The orange column represents the HAVA fund that grants our support and grants issued to jurisdictions. And that appropriation went down to, over the years, from $20 million to $14 million. And the reason for that is because some costs have been shifted to GRF. such as HAVA security grants that were originally funded by HAVA grants. Now they're being funded from GRF. Also, the increase in GRF is caused by our update to IT infrastructure. And the green column represents the personal property tax that funds the stipends for election judges and election clerks and recorders. You see that the appropriation fluctuates between the years, and that's because we have alternating years for the election cycles. The next slide, I have some fun facts for you. This is to give you a brief overview of our fiscal unit. So the invoices, the commercial invoices that we have processed over the years. In 22, we processed 642 invoices for the total of $5 million. And in 24, as of June 12th, we already processed 734 invoices for $4.6 million. The fiscal year 24, although it does end on 6/30, however, we do have the lapse period that allows us to pay any outstanding bills. So we still have almost 2.5 months to catch up any spending for fiscal year 24. So the number of invoices and the amount of total is going to go, is going to increase. Contracts over $20,000. It seems like it's not a lot of contracts. However, you see that the amount is increasing. And even in dollar amounts, the 24 is not very reflective because we have had some back and forth on some procurements with the state procurement office. However, we are working hard to make those happen and spend the money down. And the third category is the grant payments. Those include the IVRS grants and HAVA grants. So in 22, we processed 354 grants for $8 million. And in 24, through the middle of June, we processed 415 grants for $6 million. And we have seen a whole lot of grant payment requests coming through in the last couple of weeks. So we will certainly be looking at a very different picture next month. And I wanted to tell you that all these transactions are performed by our wonderful fiscal unit, and I have only 3 people in it plus me. So I think they're doing great. And the last slide I wanted to show you is for your convenience. This is the Illinois Office of Comptroller website. So for example, you submit the travel vouchers after you travel. So if you ever want to see the status of your travel voucher, you can go to Illinois Comptroller website and see if the voucher has been processed. And these are the links that can help you do this. I just want to show you really quickly. If you click on vendor payment inquiry, in this case, you are the vendor. So if you click on vendor payment inquiry, it will take you to this screen where you would enter your social security number. I'm not going to use any of your social security numbers, of course. However, I do want to show you how the screen looks. So I'm going to use the Sangamon County jurisdiction as the vendor because we have paid them. So I enter their PIN, their tax ID number, and their name, and it says select the security object, which in this case is magnet, and it changes every time you go there. So once you click submit, it will give you a listing of all the payments that were issued against the social security or tax ID that you have put in. So in this case, AC is the hard copy check. The number that starts with 000 is the EFT payment. So this vendor received both the hard copy and EFT. EFT payment will go directly into the checking or savings account, and that's the payment date. For the hard copy check, if there is no payment date, that means that the hard copy check was mailed out to you and it is outstanding. If it does have the payment date, it means that it was cashed. So last thing I wanted to say, the FY24, like I said, will have the lapse period through August 31st. And my contact information is on the slide that will be distributed to you. So if you have any questions about payments or any other budget or fiscal issues, please contact me. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Do you have questions? Member Jennifer, sorry.
Thank you for your presentation. I just had a question about slide 3, the $570,000 of unspent.
I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can hear me. My question was about in slide 3, the $570,000 of unspent FY24 contracts. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? You said that there was a push to actually spend that. Just wanted some greater insight on.
Yes, that means that the amount has been obligated. However, the invoices have not come into our office yet to be paid. So that means that's why lapse period is so important, because during this lapse period, we will receive all the invoices and process them for payments. And we monitor those contracts very closely and remind vendors to send the invoices in, because if the invoice is received after lapse period, they will be forced to go to Court of Claims, and we don't want to do that.
Thank you.
I have a question too on that same line, and I'm jumping ahead in our book to page 153, and it's all the money that is still lapsing. And I want to make sure I'm reading this correct, that we're currently lapsing $1 billion in IT. Is that right?
That was the snapshot of our fiscal picture through end of May. So as we progress, the vendors tend to like to send the invoices as close as to the end of the fiscal year as possible. So I have seen a lot of invoices come in just in the last couple of weeks. So the financial picture that you are looking at is as of May 31st. Next board meeting, we will show the financial picture as of 6/30, and those numbers will change very much.
Do you have an estimate right now, looking at your Magic 8 Ball, how much are we going to lapse?
So I know that so one of the big expenditure items for us is, of course, IVRS grants. And I know that as of June 15th, we only have 1.4 million left for the grants that haven't received, for the grant payments that have not received yet. So I would say that we should lapse less than $1 million.
May I ask if can we come up with some things that we need? I mean, I keep hearing about cameras outside the building, the microphones for the board meeting room. I mean, aren't there a few things we could buy between now and June 30th?
We have a few outstanding procurements. I'm trying to pull up my my notes. So we have some outstanding procurements that have just been filed with the controllers, and we will pay some of the invoices, such as public information campaign. That's 110,000 that we will pay. Another big item that we already processed and is just waiting to go through controller process is the HALO grant matching funds of 200,000. So there are like mail screening machines that we already received. That cost is about $120,000. So, like I said, this last. I'm sorry.
Money's out of the $1 million that we're lapsing. Those that you just read off, those three.
Yes, I am.
I would like us to look, Bernadette, please, if we could get some good microphones down in Springfield, if we have a little money to lapse. As a taxpayer, I like that we're returning money back, don't get me wrong, I don't want to spend money to be spending money. But I do think, for how often we hear about that, I would like to get some microphones.
Or just a better. I was thinking about that in the process of this meeting. It's not necessarily the microphones, it's the connection, right, Andy? Isn't that what the problem is? It's not so much our equipment as it is the Wi-Fi and access to that, and that's not always under control. So I was thinking about that because I've said the same thing. That's some better mics, well, get us some better Wi-Fi. Yeah. All right. Bernadette, would you like, do we have any other questions? Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it, and it's nice, and since you've been February, is that what she said in the beginning? Nice to see you. Thank you, Bernadette.
Okay, thank you. The next item is a legislative summary for the most recent session. I'm just going to literally pass this microphone to Brian Pryor. He's here today to provide that to the board.
Super. Brian?
Good afternoon. For those that have not met me, my name is Brian Pryor. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor out of the Springfield office and primarily work with the legislature and on state and policy. A couple of things, thanks Elena. I'm going to circle back to a couple of budget items. That's going to largely defer to you, but I wanted to highlight two things in particular that weren't addressed or just add some additional clarification. One of the items that was brought to me this year was ensuring that we had a prior year spending authority. I was able to work with Elena and Elena worked with Gombe to ensure that for federal funds, we had the ability to spend from the prior year authority to limit the amount of claims that went to the court of claims, and we were successful in achieving that. So Elena, thank you for your partnership working on that. And then another issue that was not discussed related to the budget was the newly established salaries for board members that are specifically under the comptroller's budget. But I just wanted to articulate what those new salaries would be for you all. So for the chair, it is $69,300. The vice chair is $56,900. And then for all remaining members, it's $44,533.33. So just a couple of remaining budget things that weren't covered under that. So again, thank you for those that I was able to partner with, and thanks. Specifically related to the legislative update, we had a very productive legislative session this year. I drafted a memo that's included on in your board packet on pages 138 through 142. In that memo, I address specifically 4 bills that were important to the State Board of Elections. 2 bills were specifically election related, and I provided a more detailed summary as it pertains to those 2 pieces that were passed this legislative session. Happy to answer any questions related to the memo or any specifics of those election omnibus bills. And then I was asked to provide an update related to the ranked choice voting task force. They have conducted 10 meetings thus far. The State Board of Elections role with those task forces only been from an administrative standpoint. A lot of the questions that we've fielded throughout all of those meetings is specifically related to the voting equipment and the Illinois certification process. The current status of that task force is they're working on their final report that the state board of elections doesn't have a direct role in. So I know that they were waiting to schedule that meeting potentially until after the July 4th holiday, but happy to keep you guys apprised to any changes or updates related to the ranked choice voting task force. The veto session calendar has recently been published. Veto session will be November 12th, 13th, and 14th, as well as November 19th, 20th, and 21st. I want to thank specifically the legislative subcommittee. Member Turbin isn't here, but Member Cray, thank you for your diligence in working with me in this legislative session to make sure that we streamline our ability to act quickly, as you know, is necessary in the legislature to make sure that we're able to inform that process. So much thanks to both legislative subcommittee members. As it relates to what I worked on this summer, we had a couple of requests from legislative subcommittee members, so I'll be evaluating those and providing feedback at a future board meeting once those have been evaluated. I'm currently working with directors to get brief on the issues that were raised throughout the calendar year to see what, if anything, we're able to accomplish.
Thank you, Brian. Member Craig?
I too wanted to thank Brian for all of his hard work during this past session. He was so responsive to me and Member Turbin. We had a checks team going and it was great. He kept us up to date no matter what day, what time. So it worked out really well. Thank you, Brian, for all your hard work.
You know, that. Bernadette? Thank you.
Okay, the remaining items on my report are informational. They include voter registration activity, grant funding update, FY24 fiscal status report, and the 2-year plan of staff activity for the months of June and July. If there's any questions, we're happy to take them, but there's no board action necessary.
Thank you, Bernadette. I have one quick question. Do we have other directors in the room here?
Up here currently, other than Andy as deputy director and Brian Pryor, Jordan, deputy general counsel, we're here. Down in Springfield, we have several staff sitting in down in Springfield. I can see Matt Dietrich, our public information officer. Stefan Bishop, the director of administrative services, is down in Springfield. Jeremy Kirk, assistant executive director, is in Springfield. Newman, director of campaign disclosure, is in Springfield. And I believe that is all the director and deputy director level staff.
Thank you, Bernadette, and thank you all for being there. I think it's important that we see your faces and we get introduced every time. I really do. Anything more from you, Bernadette?
Just under other business, I did want to just provide a very brief update that we are working on the policy manual review that upon Stefan Bishop's return internally, the Administrative Services Division conducted their review. They've now submitted the internal review to executive staff for our final review. And then we intend to start to submit to the board members that are working with us sections for your review very shortly and comment and return. So again, we're working on that. Stefan is available if there's any other questions right now, but we'll be in touch to work on that as well and start ramping up the review. We know you'll be doing that along with electoral board matters. So we're going to take into account your the calendar as related to those matters too.
Okay. Is there any comments by the general public? All right, sir.
I won't take agreement.
All right, Mr. Mullen, it's Ed Mullen, Mr. Mullen, general comments.
Using my.
Oh,
so
yes,
people
I
out
do.
here can see.
Thank you. I came down here today. My name is Ed Vaughn. I'm an attorney. I do a lot of advising to political action committees, and I came down here today primarily to listen to the argument on the independent expenditure and coordination issue. And I had a text yesterday from one of my clients who asked me a question about coordination and what is allowed and what's not allowed. I could not answer that question. I just could not answer that question. It's a question that's come up in the past. I've actually had a conversation with Mr. Nauman about it. He said, well, this is what I think, but I don't know what the board's gonna say. So I would really encourage the board, and I've spoken to legislators about this as well, to clarify this so that we can make sure that our clients know what the law is and follow the law. And I can't advise them if I can't figure it out. So I would really just encourage you to look further into that. And again, I've spoken to the legislator through the CBA election committee and legislative committee as well. So I'm not trying to just dump this on you. But I do think it's very important because there are a lot of people asking me questions related to the November election. And I was hoping maybe I'd hear more of your comments and questions, but I didn't. But that's just an issue that a lot of people are thinking about, and I just encourage you to look further into that and give us some more guidance.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Sometimes it's a little dicey when you get to spelling it out, because then you might leave something out and then you get it. I mean, it's tricky. So I understand, we hear you, but it's gotta come from another source and not necessarily from us. The DA's, you know, it's what's in the law that we interpret it, and there's nothing spelled out. So I understand not sure how we're gonna solve it. So, we got to go into executive session.
Just briefly before we do that, I just also wanted, Lance Goff is here today. Lance attends most of our meetings. But he is here today because he just wanted very briefly to address the board. And I had participated with him in a presentation to an overseas voting groups. They come and they travel, and especially ahead of the general election, looking for ways to improve, you know, the access of overseas voters. And they came to Illinois for a review of what we do, particularly in Cook and Chicago, but throughout Illinois to assist those voters. So I'm just gonna give the microphone very quickly to Lance, since he came today and also sat through our entire meeting.
You did, and I apologize, I would not have, we've known.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Can you hear Cassandra?
No, I can't.
Okay, I'll speak louder. Thank you.
I know you can.
We've been friends a long time. Just on behalf of OVI, Overseas Voting Initiatives, I would like to thank Bernadette for opening our session here in beginning of May. It was a chance for them to actually talk to election officials that are on the ground. We had Bernadette opening the session from the state issue. Then we had Ed Molinowski from Cook County giving the aspect of what the county does. And then I represented the Chicago Board of Election on what the Chicago Board of Election does with overseas voting. So it was a real nice presentation. We had staff we had people from all over the United States. We had 3 of the EAC board members. We have the director of the Federal Voting Assistance Program is here also. So it was received very well. I just wanted to thank the board for us for already earned that from. So thank you so much.
We thank you for all you do, so that's important. All right, can I have motion to, move into executive session for the purpose of discussing, the minutes of the May 21st, 24 executive session meeting and pending litigation pursuant to sections 2C 11 and 2C 21 of the Open Meetings Act.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, Amy?
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese, Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin, Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Anything further under the order of in executive session? Do I have a motion to arise from executive session? Second? Second. Roll call, Amy?
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, we are back in regular session. And I think I need another roll call, don't I? Roll call, Amy?
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Yes.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese, Ms. McCrory,
Present.
Mr. Turbin, Mr. Brett,
Present.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Present.
Chair Watson.
Present.
And we need to ratify our board action within the executive session, and we approve the minutes of the May 21st, 2024 meeting in the executive session. Do I have a motion to that effect?
Second.
Amy, roll call, please.
Ms. Ballard Croft,
Abstain.
Ms. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Genovese,
Yes.
Ms. McCrory,
Yes.
Mr. Turbin,
Yes.
Mr. Brett,
Yes.
Vice Chair Donahue,
Yes.
Chair Watson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, do we have any other further business from before the board? If not, Cassandra, we hope you stay cool and feel better.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oops. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.